top 12 defensive rankings here, heading into week 5 of the fantasy football season. So the first team I got this week's the New England Patriots. So the Patriots here have a great matchup at the Houston Texans here in week 5. And the Houston Texans, we know they're one of the worst offenses in all of pro football here. David Mills is the quarterback now. Tyrod Taylor went down early in the season, and he's going to be out for a while. Deshaun Watson, he's just sitting on the inactive list. And this New England Patriot team, so far this season, their defensive unit hasn't been that good. But week 4 versus Tampa Bay, they only gave up 19 points to that offense and a sack in that game. But this week here, I think they have a similar game, New England, like they did in week 2 with the Jets, where they only give up 6 to 13 points range, a few sacks, a couple interceptions, and a few fourth down stops if you play that in your league. So right here, I think Bill Belichick and this Patriot team, they don't want to fall this season to 1-4. He's going to get this defense going, and I think they'll make a few plays here on David Mills. And I got him ranked number 1 this week. The second defense I'm ranking this week's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a good matchup versus the Miami Dolphins, who offense is a total mess right now with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, Will Fuller banged up and hurt now, Myles Gaskin not having any impact at all this season. And right here, Tampa Bay coming off a couple tough ball games in a row now. I think in this one, their defense is going to tee off in this ball game versus the Miami Dolphins. It's another home game after 2 tough road grinded out ball games here for Tampa Bay. And I think they could have a similar type of day like they also had in week 2 versus the Falcons, where they get a few interceptions, find the end zone, and just keep stopping this awful Miami Dolphin offense. So I like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 2. Number 3, the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens this week got a good matchup on Monday Night Football versus the Indianapolis Colts. And so far this season, this Raven DST just hasn't done much for fantasy football owners. But right here this week in a matchup like I mentioned versus Indianapolis, I think they could get to Carson Wentz. He holds on to the football way too much, in my opinion. And opposing defensive defenders, they get to him, and once they get a hand on him, they're taking him down most of the time here. Carson Wentz definitely lost some mobility, and he's also a quarterback that takes a lot of chances and throws into traffic. So in this ball game here, I think Carson Wentz is going to have some trouble. He's going to throw into traffic. And this Baltimore Raven defense over the last few years has hawked out quarterbacks into throwing those interceptions. And I think in this ball game, I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens find the end zone in this one. The 4th defense is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Steelers off to a horrible start this season. But right here versus the Denver Broncos, who most likely going to have Drew Lock starting at quarterback. We know Lock's a backup in this league. He's proven last season that he's not really starter material. And in this ball game, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers could get to Lock early and often, and definitely have him turn the ball over 2 or 3 times in this one. And like I mentioned, the Steelers DST hasn't done anything since week 1 at the Buffalo Bills. So they're in a home game. They don't want to fall to 1-4 either. And this ball game, I think versus Denver, they take advantage of the offensive line. They take advantage of Drew Lock's mistakes. And I think they have a good ball game. This week is the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 4. And they're available, surprisingly, in 24% of fantasy leagues as well. The next defense I have this week ranked at number 5 is the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings, I know it's been a tough season for them so far, but right here they got a great matchup versus the Detroit Lions that give up the 7th most fantasy points to DSTs this season. So right here, a couple decent games the Vikings had early in the season, but the last couple weeks versus Seattle and Cleveland, they didn't do much. Even though versus Cleveland, they only gave up 14 points, but only had 3 sacks to show for it. But right here, I think Jared Goff's good for 1 or 2 turnovers. And he's another quarterback as well. If you get a hand on him, he's most likely going down in this ball game. And it's an indoor game. Minnesota's at home. And I think they'll make a few plays on defense to have a top 5 performance. Number 6, the Denver Broncos. So the Broncos defense has been their strong suit so far this season here. And even last week versus Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, I know they didn't have a great fantasy day, but they made them earn it in Baltimore over there. 23 points allowed and 3 sacks. And this week at Pittsburgh gives up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs. And right here, this Steeler offense is struggling this season. The only bright spot for me for them is Deontay Johnson and Najee Harris we saw the last 2 weeks get things going. But besides that, Chase Claypool hasn't done much. Juju Smith-Schuster, he's been a total bust. And Freiermuth and Eric Ebron really haven't been factoring into the offensive side of things. So right here, if Denver's going to have a chance, if Drew Lock's starting in this game, they're going to have to rely on the defense and their two running backs, Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. And Big Ben, he's definitely in the latter part of his career with his best seasons behind him. And he's good for a couple sacks, and he's good to turn over the ball as well, I think, in this ball game. So I think this could be a low 20 type of game between these two teams where both defenses make a few plays. Number 7, the Las Vegas Raiders. So the Raiders, a tough Monday night loss for their first loss of the season. It was for them at the Los Angeles Chargers. But this week they got a great matchup versus the Chicago Bears, who give up the 4th most fantasy points to DSTs this season. So right here, the Vegas Raiders, they got added in 9% of fantasy leagues, and they were recommended add on the waiver wire this week by me. But right here this week, I like the matchup like I mentioned a lot. This team coming off a tough loss in a divisional game here. They're going to come back home to Vegas here, and I think they're going to get to Justin Fields or Dalton. It don't matter who's going to start a quarterback, in my opinion, here for the Bears. These guys, they just hold on to the ball too long. They take too many sacks, and they're not getting their receivers involved in the game, really, besides Darnell Mooney last week. And the other thing, David Montgomery, he's going to be out 4 to 5 weeks as well for this team, even though Damian Williams is a very capable running back that we saw him do well in his days over there in Kansas City. But in this ball game, I think they're going to be a good defense this week here as the Raiders make a few turnovers and possibly find the end zone as well. The next defense is the Atlanta Falcons. So this is a 1 week thing here with the Atlanta Falcons, and I picked them up in a few fantasy leagues this week because they versus the New York Jets, who give up the most fantasy points to DSTs this season. So right here, obviously the Falcons, they are poor defense, no doubt about it. Each and every week they're giving up 25 to 30 points a game to opposing offenses. But right here, this Jet team, I know last week it was a good victory for the Jets. They scored 27 points in that game versus the Tennessee Titans. But remember, this ball game is in London, definite time zone difference. And right here, the Falcons, they've had some success in London over the few seasons they played there, that one game. So right here, I think in this game, Zach Wilson, it's going to be trouble for him in this one. Jets offensive line, one of the worst O-lines in the league. And I think the Falcons, they'll get to him 3 or 4 times in that aspect of the game and make them turn it over maybe once or twice. So I think this week they could have a top 8 defense, and I got them in number 8. Number 9, the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers defense so far this season, they've been pretty good. And in week 4 was their best outing of the season versus the Pittsburgh Steelers right here. 17 points allowed, 2 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery, and 2 4th down stops if you play that. And this week, week 5 at Cincinnati. Cincinnati, they've been a weird offense this season. They would start off slow in the ball games, and we've seen it the last 2 weeks now with the Cincinnati Bengals. And then second half, Joe Burrow and this offense picks things up. But right here, Joe Mixon, we don't know if he's going to play in this ball game. So Samaje Perine will be the starter, obviously, and that's a big part of their offense gone if Joe Mixon is sitting. T. Higgins, supposedly he's going to play in this ball game, returning to practice, but we don't know his status. And right here, this Green Bay Packer team, they're rolling after getting blown out in week 1 at the New Orleans Saints. They're 3-1 now on the season, and I think this D-line could get to Joe Burrow a few times. And Burrow, in my opinion, is still a young quarterback. He's good for a couple turnovers, and it wouldn't surprise me to see the Packers find the end zone as well. The next defense, number 10, the Arizona Cardinals. So the Cardinals, they've been a pretty decent DST unit this season here, is Arizona. And they got a mediocre matchup versus the San Francisco 49ers. But right here, we don't know if it's going to be Jimmy G yet or Trey Lance 100% starting. But right here, if it's Trey Lance, I think they could get to this rookie, make him make a few mistakes, even though he looked pretty decent in that second half where he came in for Russell Wilson in that ball game. But right here, I think they still can make plays on him. This offense is obviously explosive here, is Arizona. And they took care of business in week 4 at the Rams. And I think they take care of business once again here in week 5 versus the San Francisco 49ers. And J.J. Watt and this defense makes a few plays. Number 11, I got this week, the Los Angeles Rams. So the Rams, they got a tough matchup tonight here on Thursday Night Football versus the Seattle Seahawks. Chris Carson, he's questionable for this ball game. I think he's not going to play because we saw Alex Collins get a lot of carries in that one. But anyway, right here, I think this Ram team, they still got two of the best defenders at their positions in Aaron Donald, obviously, and Jalen Ramsey at corner. So the Rams last week, they got blown out in a tough loss to a division rival in the Arizona Cardinals, giving up 37 points and 3 sacks they always had in that game. But in this game, I think it's Seattle. It's gonna be more of a defensive battle than people think, even though I still think it ends in the high 20s for both teams this ball game. But right here, Russell Wilson, his O-line isn't the greatest this season. He might not have a great running game in this ball game. And the Rams here with impact players on defense, like I mentioned, in my opinion, they could go out there and make a few plays in this ball game. And I got them at a safe number 11, and the 12th and final defense this week is the Tennessee Titans. So the Titans, I would have ranked them higher this week, but after what I saw last week versus a weak Jet offense, they just couldn't do anything for fantasy owners. 27 points allowed, a sack and an into, and this week a great matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars that give up the 9th most fantasy points to DSTs. But in my opinion, this Tennessee Titan team is a mess this season here. For whatever reason, they got two great receivers in Julio and A.J. Brown. Both those guys are banged up, even though I don't know how serious the Julio injury really is that he sat out right away. They ruled him out last week on Wednesday. But anyway, this defense, they're going to have to make plays in this game. And last week, like I mentioned, they couldn't get to Zach Wilson, who's behind one of the worst offensive lines in pro football. And Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion, he's better than a Zach Wilson. So right here, I think the Titans can make a few plays, but they've been dropped in 30% of fantasy leagues after that tough outing versus the New York Jets. But this week, I got a feeling they still will finish in the top 12 at defense and special team ranking. So that's the top 12 defenses I'm ranking for week 5 of the fantasy football season.